The tanker sits motionless in the middle of the Strait of Hormuz. It is a wall of steel, silent and dead in the water, blocking the horizon. The sea around it is unnervingly flat, reflecting the glare of the midday sun. Then, the silence breaks. A single speedboat cuts through the water, its engine whining with a high, jagged pitch that echoes off the tanker's iron hull. The boat does not stop. It carves a tight circle around the massive vessel, carving white wake into the blue. Every pass brings it closer to the tanker's towering side. There is no radio chatter, no signals, just the rhythmic drone of the engine and the rhythmic slap of waves against the bow. The tanker does not respond. It cannot move. It is trapped in the center of the narrowest corridor on Earth. The boat turns again, its bow cutting sharp, and the distance between the two vessels shrinks. This is not a patrol. It is a demonstration. The gatekeeper has arrived, and the world is watching, waiting to see if the engine on the tanker will ever start again. The standoff on the water is only the beginning. Millions of miles away, at local stations, the impact of this silence is already locked into the systems of the world. Even if the tanker engines roared to life this very second, even if the speedboat retreated into the haze and the strait cleared, your fuel costs would not budge. They are frozen. This is the brutal reality of the global supply chain. The infrastructure of the modern world operates on a massive, invisible delay. It is a 4-month lag that renders immediate diplomacy useless for your bank account. Experts call this the Hormuz Toll Booth effect. It is a mechanism of economic entrapment where the price you pay at the pump is determined by events that happened seasons ago. The global oil market does not react to the present. It reacts to the past. You are paying for the bottleneck that occurred months before this tanker ever went motionless. The world is trapped in a grinding cycle, and the clock is already ticking. No political resolution can bypass the sheer weight of this logistical inertia. The toll is already owed, and the meter is running. The vulnerability is not just a theory. It is a map of global reliance. Helima Croft from RBC has charted the reality of our energy infrastructure, and the data paints a terrifying picture. Every single day, 20% of the world's total oil supply is funneled through this narrow, jagged channel. It is a choke point that defies logic. The global economy, with all its reach and industrial might, is effectively tethered to a stretch of water that can be paralyzed by a single vessel. Think of the scale. Tankers, laden with crude, moving like slow-motion giants, pass through a gap so tight that navigation is a constant, high-stakes exercise. If the flow stops here, the shockwaves are immediate. Every major economy on the planet relies on this constant, rhythmic pulse of energy passing through the strait. It is not just about fuel prices. It is about the structural integrity of supply lines that keep cities lit and factories running. The world is built on the assumption that this channel will remain open, but the geography tells a different story. It is a singular, fragile point of failure. We have constructed a global system that demands constant movement, yet we have allowed that movement to depend entirely on a corridor that is essentially a bottleneck. The fragility is absolute. Iran does not see a waterway, they see a lever. Every tanker that slows, every patrol boat that cuts across a bow is a calculated turn of that lever. They understand the math of the global economy better than the markets themselves. They know that the world is addicted to the flow of energy that passes through their backyard, and they have mastered the art of calibrated disruption. It is not about a total blockade. It is about the constant, simmering threat of one. By hovering at the edge of international waters, they turn the strait into a geopolitical hostage. This is a deliberate strategy of friction. They have successfully transformed a strip of sea into a tool for national leverage, forcing every major power to factor the strait into their foreign policy. It is a high-stakes game of nerves, where the cost of entry is paid in global volatility. They control the pace of the trade, the pressure on the markets, and the anxiety of every government that relies on this corridor. The strait is no longer just a passage for oil. It is the center of a grand power play. Iran holds the gate, and they have made it clear that the gatekeeper decides who gets through and at what price. This is the reality of their influence, written in the wake of every vessel that passes through their reach. The world has realized that waiting for the gatekeeper is a losing game. A frantic, desperate energy has gripped the capitals of the region. They're looking for an exit, a way to bypass the narrow channel that has held them hostage for decades. The strategy is simple in theory, but monumental in practice. Move the oil over land. If the water is a trap, the desert must become the highway. This is not a shift in policy. It is a fundamental reconfiguration of global geography. Massive resources are being funneled into a project that defies the traditional limits of infrastructure. The goal is to reach a point where the strait becomes an optional route rather than a mandatory one. But the terrain is hostile. It is a landscape of rugged peaks and unforgiving heat. Moving millions of barrels of oil requires cutting through mountains that have stood as natural barriers for eons. The race is on, and every mile of progress is a direct strike against the status quo. The global oil trade is attempting to break its own chains, and the engineers on the ground are the soldiers of this new conflict. It is a slow, grinding, and immensely expensive operation. The intent is clear: to strip the gatekeeper of their power by simply making them irrelevant. The path out is being carved, 1 ton of earth at a time. In the heart of the desert, the pace of construction has turned frantic. UAE crews are working in shifts that never end, their machinery grinding through the sand 24 hours a day. This is not just building. It is a race against the clock. Massive excavators carve deep, jagged trenches into the dunes, while welding teams fuse sections of steel pipe that stretch toward the horizon. The air is thick with dust and the constant, rhythmic thud of pile drivers. Every length of steel dropped into the earth is a calculated move in a high-stakes game. They're turning the desert floor into a web of pipelines, creating a bypass that operates with the urgency of a battlefield. The scale is absolute. Heavy trucks churn through the sand, hauling supplies to the front lines of this engineering campaign. There is no downtime, no pause for the heat, and no room for error. The work pulses with a frantic energy, a literal arms race of concrete and iron, designed to strip the gatekeeper of its power. Every yard of pipe laid is a direct strike at the bottleneck, a physical manifestation of a nation deciding its own economic future. The desert is being transformed, rewritten by the sheer force of industrial momentum. Across the border, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is executing a maneuver of its own. It is a massive, calculated pivot that pushes the boundaries of engineering to reach the Red Sea. They are not merely building, they are launching a strategic hammer blow against a gatekeeper. Thousands of workers and miles of heavy pipe are surging toward the coast, ignoring the natural obstacles of the interior. This is the race for Peak Hormuz. Every weld, every section of steel lowered into the trench is a direct strike aimed at the trade equation. They are stripping away the leverage that has defined this region for decades. The scale is immense, turning the desert into a vast industrial corridor. It is a slow, grinding process, yet it carries the weight of a geopolitical shift. By reaching the Red Sea, they bypass the bottleneck entirely and render the Strait of Hormuz a secondary concern. The goal is total independence from the narrow channel. The machinery moves with relentless purpose, carving a new artery for global commerce. It is a cold, hard calculation of steel and pressure, designed to dismantle the power of the gatekeeper once and for all. The influence is already beginning to fracture. Every individual foot of pipe lowered into the sand serves as a deliberate challenge to the status quo. The gatekeeper's power was built on the geography of a narrow strait, but that foundation is now being systematically dismantled. As the steel veins stretch further across the dunes, the geopolitical leverage previously held by the coast is being stripped away. This is not just civil engineering, it is an act of economic warfare. Each joint sealed, each trench backfilled, represents a direct strike against the old trade equation. The monopoly held by the strait is visibly fracturing. You can see the shift in the way the infrastructure pushes forward, indifferent to the political protests that once dictated the flow of energy. The old order is not merely fading. It is being buried under miles of industrial progress. The gatekeeper's grip on the global economy is loosening with every passing day. As the pipelines reach toward their destination, the strategic value of the Strait of Hormuz is being drained, one segment at a time. The transition is brutal, absolute, and impossible to reverse. The world is watching the map change in real time as the gatekeeper finds itself isolated by the very steel that now bypasses its reach. The map may look simple, but the terrain tells a different story. The path to energy independence runs through jagged, unforgiving mountain ranges that refuse to yield. Heavy machinery grinds to a halt on steep inclines, tires spinning against a loose shale while cables snap under the immense tension of hauling pipes into the heights. Every kilometer gained requires a brutal negotiation with the landscape. Yesterday, a transport convoy spent 12 hours stranded on a narrow ridge after a primary axle buckled under the weight of the steel. These are the moments that do not appear on high-level charts, but they dictate the pace of the entire project. The logistics are a nightmare of supply chains stretched to their absolute breaking point. Fuel for the excavators must be trucked through heat that warps the metal surfaces of the equipment. Dust clogs the engines, requiring constant manual maintenance that pulls crews away from the welding lines. Success is not guaranteed. It is being carved out of rock and heat, inch by exhausting inch. The progress is slow, steady, and plagued by the constant risk of mechanical failure. Every delay on these slopes is a victory for the status quo. The project is locked in a grinding war of attrition, where the geography itself acts as a barrier to the global shift in power. The final valve remains closed. Until that metal seal turns, the global economy continues to pay the price of a bottlenecked world. 4 months is the calculated lag between the current reality and the potential relief promised by these desert projects. Every day that passes without the bypass completion, the toll booth in the Strait of Hormuz dictates the cost of your commute and the price of your heating. The clock is not a metaphor. It is an economic countdown. We are witnessing the slow, grinding end of an era where one narrow channel held the world hostage. If the construction teams fail to reach the finish line, or if the machinery stalls one last time, the surcharge remains. You are watching the transition happen in real time. Yet the impact is delayed by the very infrastructure that is meant to liberate the market. The pipelines are the only barrier between you and a permanent energy tax. As the sun sets over the desert sites, the work continues in the dark. The world is trying to pave a way around the gatekeeper, but until the last weld is set and the pressure gauge hits the mark, the debt is still due. The toll must be paid.